At the glittering gala of Willow Hall, a priceless diamond earring vanishes from Lady Beatrice Ashford's ear, sparking a web of suspicion. Was it the envious widow, Clara Wentworth, desperate to reclaim her status? The cunning jeweller, Gideon Vale, with a shadowy past? Or the nervous waiter Thomas Reed, crushed by debt? Only Miss Jane Marple, with her quiet wisdom and piercing gaze, can unravel the secrets hidden in the shadows of this opulent night. A single clue, a pearl bead, a crested button, will lead to a shocking confession. Chapter 1. The Gala at Willow Hall. The autumn evening wrapped Willow Hall in a soft amber glow, its ancient stone walls softened by the flicker of torchlight along the drive. Within, the ballroom shimmered with opulence, chandeliers dripped with crystal, their prisms scattering light across polished floors and the silken gowns of the county's elite. Lady Beatrice Ashford, the mistress of the hall, moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her emerald silk gown catching the eye of every guest. But it was the diamond earrings, each a perfect teardrop, glinting with icy fire, that drew gasps and whispers. Heirlooms of the Ashford family, they were said to have adorned a duchess at the court of Queen Anne. Miss Jane Marple, seated unobtrusively in a velvet-upholstered chair near the fireplace, observed the scene with her customary quiet attention. A distant cousin of Lady Beatrice, she had been invited almost as an afterthought, her presence a nod to family ties rather than social prominence. Her simple black dress and lace shawl rendered her all but invisible among the glittering throng, yet her eyes, bright and bird-like, missed nothing. She sipped her sherry, noting the undercurrents beneath the gala's polished surface, the tight smiles of rivals, the calculating glances of ambitious newcomers, the faint strain in Lady Beatrice's laughter as she greeted her guests. The orchestra struck up a waltz, and the room swirled into motion. Couples glided across the floor, their shadows weaving patterns on the walls. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on a few figures. Mrs. Clara Wentworth, a widow whose sapphire velvet gown could not mask her restless energy. Mr. Gideon Vale, the jeweller, whose sharp features and meticulous attire suggested a man accustomed to precision. And Thomas Reed, a young waiter nervous demeanour, seemed at odds with the practised ease of the other staff. Miss Marple's fingers moved rhythmically, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap, a habit that allowed her to observe without drawing attention. As the evening wore on, the air grew warm with the press of bodies and the clink of champagne flutes. Lady Beatrice, radiant at the centre of the room, danced with a local magistrate, her earrings catching the light with every turn. Miss Marple noted how Clara Wentworth's eyes followed those jewels, her lips tightening imperceptibly. She saw, too, Mr. Vale pause near a sideboard, his fingers brushing the edge of a velvet case in his pocket. Thomas Reed, meanwhile, moved through the crowd with a tray of drinks, his steps faltering when he passed close to the hostess. It was nearing midnight when a sudden, piercing scream cut through the music. The orchestra faltered, and the dancers stilled. Lady Beatrice stood frozen in the centre of the ballroom, one hand clutching her left ear. "My earring!" she cried, her voice trembling with shock. "It's gone! My diamond earring is gone!" The room erupted in murmurs as guests craned their necks, some stepping forward, others retreating as if the theft might taint them. Sir Henry Clithering, a retired Scotland Yard commissioner and an old acquaintance of Miss Marple, rose from his seat with calm authority. "Nobody leaves," he said firmly, signalling to the footman to guard the doors. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her mind already at work, She watched Lady Beatrice's distress, genuine yet tinged with something else. Anger, perhaps, or fear. She noted Clara Wentworth's quick glance toward the terrace doors, Mr. Vale's sudden stillness, and Thomas Reed's pale face as he shrank back against the wall. A diamond earring, she mused, was no small prize. Its loss would stir motives as varied as greed, desperation, or spite. As Sir Henry began to organise the guests, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, where she had once unravelled a theft over a mere silver teapot. People are much the same everywhere, she thought, her eyes narrowing, and so are their secrets. Chapter 2. The Missing Heirloom. The ballroom of Willow Hall, moments ago a stage of elegance and mirth, now hummed with a different energy. A restless, uneasy murmur that rippled through the gathered guests like a chill wind through dry leaves. The chandeliers still blazed, their light glinting off champagne flutes and jewelled brooches. But the music had ceased, and the air was thick with suspicion. Lady Beatrice Ashford stood at the centre of the room, her emerald gown slightly askew, one hand pressed to her bare left ear, as if willing the missing diamond earring to reappear. Her face, usually composed and regal, was pale with shock, her eyes wide with a mixture of indignation and disbelief. "It's gone," she repeated, her voice trembling, though whether from grief or fury was unclear. "My earring, stolen, right here among us." Miss Jane Marple, seated in her unobtrusive corner by the fireplace, set her sherry glass down with a gentle clink, her knitting needles pausing in their rhythmic dance. She had watched the scene unfold with her characteristic calm, her sharp eyes darting from face to face, cataloguing every gesture, every fleeting expression. The gala, so carefully orchestrated by Lady Beatrice, had been upended in an instant, and Miss Marple knew that such moments, when masks slipped and nerves frayed, revealed truths that might otherwise remain hidden. She adjusted her lace shawl and leaned forward slightly, her attention fixed on the unfolding drama. Sir Henry Clithering, his broad shoulders and authoritative presence cutting through the crowd, took command with the ease of a man accustomed to crises. His years at Scotland Yard had honed his instincts, and though retired, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of one who knew how to manage chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying over the whispers, "please remain calm. No one is to leave this room until we have searched and questioned those present. A theft has occurred, and we shall get to the bottom of it." He signalled to the footmen, who moved swiftly to guard the French doors leading to the terrace, and the grand double doors to the hall. The guests, some indignant, others curious, settled into an uneasy compliance, their eyes darting toward Lady Beatrice and then to one another. Miss Marple's gaze settled on the four individuals who, by proximity or circumstance, had drawn Sir Henry's attention. Lady Beatrice herself, whose distress seemed genuine, but not without complexity. Mrs. Clara Wentworth, the wealthy widow whose sharp features betrayed a flicker of unease. Mr. Gideon Vale, the jeweller, whose polished exterior could not entirely mask a certain wariness. And Thomas Reed, the young waiter, whose pale face and trembling hands marked him as the most visibly shaken. Each, Miss Marple noted, had been near Lady Beatrice at some point during the evening, and each carried the weight of their own secrets. Sir Henry approached Lady Beatrice first, his manner gentle but firm. "Beatrice, my dear, can you tell us exactly when you noticed the earring was missing?" He guided her to a velvet settee, where she sank down, her hands twisting in her lap. The remaining earring, a single sparkling teardrop, gleamed against her dark hair, a lonely twin to its stolen counterpart. "It was during the waltz," she said, her voice catching. "I was dancing with Mr. Hargrove, the magistrate. I felt a slight tug at my ear. Nothing painful, just a sensation, as if the earring had caught on something. I thought little of it. The clasp is secure, or so I believed. But when I reached up to adjust it just now, it was gone." Her eyes filled with tears, and she pressed a lace handkerchief to her lips. "Those earrings have been in my family for generations. They're not just jewels. They're history, irreplaceable." Miss Marple, listening intently, noted the tremor in Beatrice's voice, but also the way her eyes flickered toward the crowd, as if gauging their reactions. Was it the natural response of a woman wronged, or something more calculated? Miss Marple recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a vicar's wife had claimed a stolen brooch, only to reveal later it had been pawned to cover a gambling debt. People, she knew, could stage their own victimhood for reasons far removed from theft. Sir Henry turned to the guests. "Did anyone see anything unusual during the waltz? Anyone near Lady Beatrice, or perhaps someone acting oddly?" His question was met with a chorus of murmurs and shaken heads, though Miss Marple noticed Mrs. Wentworth's lips purse slightly, as if she were suppressing a comment. Mr. Vale, standing near the sideboard, adjusted his cufflinks with a deliberate air, while Thomas Reed shrank further into the shadows, his tray of drinks abandoned on a nearby table. To organize the inquiry, Sir Henry called for a private room where he could question the key figures. The library, with its oak-panelled walls and heavy drapes, was chosen, and the 4 suspects were ushered in one by one. Miss Marple, invited by Sir Henry to join as an observer. "Your knack for noticing things, Jane, is worth its weight in gold," he had said, settled into a leather armchair. Her knitting resumed as a pretext for her presence. The soft click of her needles provided a steady counterpoint to the tension in the room. Lady Beatrice was questioned first, her account consistent but embellished with emotion. "I've worn those earrings to every gala since my debut," she said, her voice breaking. "They were my grandmother's, given to her by an admiral who served under Nelson. To lose one is like losing a piece of my heart." She described her movements during the evening, greeting guests, dancing with several partners, and pausing near the terrace to catch her breath. "I was never alone," she insisted. "Someone must have brushed against me, slipped it off without my noticing." Miss Marple, watching closely, noted that Beatrice's hands trembled, but her eyes were dry, and her glance darted toward Mrs. Wentworth, who waited outside the library door. Next came Mrs. Clara Wentworth, whose sapphire gown seemed to absorb the library's dim light. She carried herself with the confidence of a woman accustomed to wealth, though Miss Marple knew from village gossip that Clara's fortune had taken a blow in a failed railway venture. "I have no need for stolen jewels," Clara declared, her voice sharp as cut glass. "My own diamonds are quite sufficient, thank you." She gestured to the glittering necklace at her throat, a piece that rivaled Beatrice's earrings in brilliance. Yet Miss Marple observed the slight flush on Clara's cheeks, the way her fingers toyed with the necklace as if to reassure herself of its presence. "I was dancing with Colonel Bantry during the waltz," Clara continued. "I saw Beatrice with Mr. Hargrove, but I was too busy enjoying myself to notice anything else." Her smile was tight, and Miss Marple wondered if Clara's envy of Beatrice's heirlooms might have tipped into something darker. Mr. Gideon Vale entered next, his movements precise and his expression carefully neutral. As the jeweller who had appraised the Ashford earrings only a week prior, he was quick to confirm their value. "Exquisite. Stones?" he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "Flawless. 1-carat diamonds, set in platinum. I examined them myself at Lady Beatrice's request. The clasps were secure, not easily dislodged." When Sir Henry pressed him on his whereabouts, Vale's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. "I was circulating, as one does at such events," he said. "I spoke with several guests about my work, including Mrs. Wentworth, who inquired about a bracelet." Miss Marple's needles paused briefly. She had seen Vale near the terrace doors during the waltz, his hand resting on that velvet case in his pocket. A jeweller, she thought, would know precisely how to remove an earring without detection, and how to profit from it. Finally, Thomas Reed was called in, his face ashen and his hands clasped tightly before him. The young waiter, barely 20, seemed to shrink under Sir Henry's gaze. "I was serving drinks, sir," he stammered. "I didn't go near Lady Beatrice, not once." His voice cracked, and he swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the floor. Miss Marple, watching him closely, recalled his hesitant steps during the waltz, the way he had lingered near the hostess with an empty tray. His jacket, she noted, was slightly worn at the cuffs, and his shoes bore the scuffs of hard use. Poverty, she knew, could drive even an honest man to desperate acts. "I didn't see nothing, sir," Thomas added, his words tumbling out too quickly. "I was just doing my job." Sir Henry dismissed Thomas for the moment, turning to Miss Marple as the library door closed. "Well, Jane, what do you make of it?" he asked, his tone half amused, half expectant. He knew her ability to see through the fog of human behaviour, to discern the truth in a glance or a gesture. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly, though her expression remained serene. "It's early yet, Henry," she said, her voice soft but deliberate. "But people are rarely as careful as they think. The earring was taken by someone who knew its value and saw an opportunity. We must look at who had the chance, and who had the need." She paused, her needles resuming their steady rhythm. "Lady Beatrice is genuinely upset, but there's something in her manner, a touch of calculation perhaps. Mrs. Wentworth is proud, but pride can mask want. Mr. Vale knows too much about those earrings, and young Thomas, well, he's frightened, and frightened people often have something to hide." Sir Henry nodded, his mind already turning to the search of the ballroom. "We'll comb the place," he said. "It may have fallen off, though I doubt it. Those clasps don't give way easily." He glanced at Miss Marple, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "You'll keep your eyes open, won't you, Jane?" "Always," she replied, her tone mild, but her mind racing. She thought of the terrace, where Beatrice had paused during the evening, and the fleeting glimpses of movement she had caught through the French doors. She thought, too, of the pearl beads she had found near those doors, tucked into a fold of the carpet, a bead that matched nothing on Beatrice's gown or Clara's necklace. It might belong to a servant's uniform, or it might be a clever distraction. Miss Marple tucked the thought away, knowing that the smallest detail could unravel the tightest knot. As the guests were herded back into the ballroom for the search, Miss Marple remained in the library, her knitting a quiet pretense. She watched through the open door as the crowd milled about, their faces a tapestry of curiosity, fear, and indignation. Lady Beatrice stood by the fireplace, her single earring catching the light, a beacon of what had been lost. Clara Wentworth whispered to a companion, her eyes sharp and searching. Gideon Vale lingered near the sideboard, his fingers brushing that velvet case once more. And Thomas Reed, tasked with collecting empty glasses, moved with a jerky haste that betrayed his nerves. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to a long-ago theft in St. Mary Mead, where a maid had stolen a silver spoon to pay for her brother's medicine. The motive had been simple, born of desperation, and the thief had been caught because she could not stop glancing at the drawer where she had hidden her prize. Motive and opportunity, Miss Marple murmured to herself. They always tell the story. She resolved to watch the suspects closely, to listen to the silences between their words. The diamond earring, she knew, was still within reach, hidden, perhaps, but not yet gone. And in the quiet of her mind, she began to weave the threads of suspicion into a pattern that would, in time, reveal the truth. Chapter 3. The Hostess's Tale. The library at Willow Hall, with its heavy oak shelves and the faint scent of old leather, provided a sombre contrast to the glittering chaos of the ballroom. The fire crackled in the grate, casting long shadows across the room, as Lady Beatrice Ashford sat rigidly on the velvet settee, her emerald gown pooling around her like spilled ink. The single diamond earring still gleamed in her right ear, a taunting reminder of its missing twin. Sir Henry Clitheron stood before her, his notepad open, his questions measured but relentless. Miss Jane Marple, ensconced in her armchair, appeared absorbed in her knitting, though her eyes missed nothing. The flicker of Beatrice's gaze, the tight clasp of her hands, the subtle tremor in her voice. "Beatrice," Sir Henry began, his tone gentle yet probing, "you say you felt a tug during the waltz. Can you recall anything more? Who was near you, perhaps? Or any unusual movement?" He leaned forward slightly, his years as a commissioner lending him an air of quiet authority. Lady Beatrice drew a shaky breath, her fingers twisting the lace handkerchief in her lap. "It's all a blur, Henry," she said, her voice low but laced with emotion. "I was dancing with Mr. Hargrove, as I told you. The room was warm, the music so lively. I felt the tug, just a slight pull, and I thought perhaps my hair had caught in the clasp. I didn't check immediately. How foolish of me! It was only later, when I stepped away from the dance, that I touched my ear and found it gone." Her eyes brimmed with tears, but Miss Marple noted they did not fall. Beatrice's distress was palpable, yet there was a theatrical quality to it, a performance honed by years of hosting such grand affairs. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a steady rhythm that anchored her thoughts. She recalled a garden party in St. Mary Mead, where a young woman had wept over a lost ring, only for it to be found later in a pawn shop, sold to cover a lover's debts. Distress, she knew, could be genuine and still conceal a deeper truth. Beatrice's glance darted briefly toward the library door, where Mrs. Clara Wentworth waited, her silhouette visible through the frosted glass. Was it fear, Miss Marple wondered, or something closer to accusation? Sir Henry pressed on. "You mentioned you paused by the terrace doors earlier in the evening. Could the earring have come loose then? Perhaps when you stepped outside for air?" Beatrice shook her head, her lips tightening. "I was only there a moment to catch my breath. The ballroom was stifling, and I needed a breath of cool air. I didn't notice anything amiss then. Besides, I was surrounded by people all evening, guests, staff, everyone. Someone must have taken it, Henry, Someone bold enough to slip it off my ear in the midst of a crowd." Her voice rose, a note of indignation breaking through her sorrow. Miss Marple tilted her head, her mind sifting through Beatrice's words. The terrace, she thought, was a likely place for a thief to act, less crowded, dimly lit, with easy access to the gardens beyond. Yet Beatrice's insistence on being surrounded felt rehearsed, as if she were constructing a narrative to deflect suspicion. Miss Marple made a mental note to examine the terrace herself, to see what clues it might hold. "And who was near you during the waltz?" Sir Henry asked, his pencil poised. "Anyone who might have brushed against you?" Beatrice hesitated, her eyes narrowing as if searching her memory. "Well, Mr. Hargrove, of course, but he's a gentleman, above suspicion. Mrs. Wentworth was dancing nearby with Colonel Bantry. I saw her sapphire gown flashing in the light. And that jeweller, Mr. Vale, was hovering about, as he always does, talking up his wares to anyone who'd listen." She paused, her voice dropping. "And the waiter, that nervous boy, Thomas Reed. He was circling with a tray, though I don't recall him coming too close. But who else could it be? It must have been someone quick, someone cunning." Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second. Beatrice's mention of Thomas Reed felt pointed, almost too deliberate. Was she genuinely recalling his presence, or steering suspicion toward the most vulnerable suspect? Miss Marple had seen such tactics before, in the case of a stolen hymn book at the vicarage, where the culprit had loudly accused a choir boy to cover her own guilt. She glanced at Sir Henry, who seemed to catch the same undertone, his brow furrowing slightly. "Very well, Beatrice," he said, closing his notepad. "We'll speak with the others and search the ballroom thoroughly. If the earring was dropped rather than stolen, we may yet recover it." His tone was reassuring, but Miss Marple knew he doubted the earring had simply fallen. The clasps, as Mr. Vale had confirmed, were secure, designed to withstand the whirl of a dance. Lady Beatrice rose, smoothing her gown with a trembling hand. "Please, Henry, find it," she said, her voice breaking. "It's not just the value. It's what it means to my family, to lose it like this, in my own home." She trailed off, dabbing at her eyes with the handkerchief before sweeping out of the library, her single earring catching the firelight as she passed. Sir Henry turned to Miss Marple, his expression a mix of exasperation and amusement. "She's shaken, no doubt," he said, lowering his voice. "But there's something in her manner that doesn't quite add up. What do you think, Jane?" Miss Marple folded her knitting carefully, her eyes thoughtful. "She's telling the truth about her distress, Henry," she said softly, "but not, I think, the whole truth. There's a calculation in her words, a careful choice of who to name and who to omit. She mentioned young Thomas almost as an afterthought, yet it felt deliberate. And her glance at Mrs. Wentworth. There's history there, I'd wager. We must watch her closely, but not to the exclusion of the others." Sir Henry nodded, his respect for Miss Marple's insight evident. "You're right, as usual. Let's have Mrs. Wentworth in next. If there's bad blood between her and Beatrice, we'll soon find out." He moved to the door, calling for the next suspect, while Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her mind already turning over the details of Beatrice's story. As Clara Wentworth entered, her sapphire gown rustling, Miss Marple considered the hostess's tale anew. Beatrice's insistence on being surrounded, her quick naming of Thomas Reed, her fleeting glance at Clara. These were threads in a tapestry not yet fully woven. The earring, Miss Marple knew, was more than a jewel. It was a catalyst, drawing out the hidden motives of those around it. And in the quiet of the library, with the fire casting its flickering light, she felt the first stirrings of a pattern, one that would, in time, lead her to the truth. Chapter 4. The Guest's Ambition. The library door swung open, admitting Mrs. Clara Wentworth with a rustle of sapphire velvet that seemed to absorb the firelight. She carried herself with the poise of a woman accustomed to commanding attention. Her diamond necklace, a cascade of stones that rivaled the lost earring in brilliance, glinting at her throat. Yet Miss Jane Marple, seated in her armchair with her knitting needles moving in their quiet rhythm, noted the faint tightness around Clara's mouth, the way her fingers brushed the necklace as if to anchor herself. Clara's eyes, sharp and assessing, swept the room, lingering briefly on Sir Henry Clithering before settling on Miss Marple with a flicker of dismissal. To her, the elderly spinster was merely a fixture, as unremarkable as the library's faded tapestries. Sir Henry, standing by the desk with his notepad in hand, gestured for Clara to sit. "Mrs. Wentworth," he began, his tone courteous but direct, "you were dancing near Lady Beatrice during the waltz, when she noticed the earring missing. Can you tell us what you saw, or perhaps anyone who might have been close to her?" Clara settled into the chair opposite, her posture impeccable, though Miss Marple caught the slight twitch of her gloved hand. "I was enjoying myself, Sir Henry," she said, her voice crisp with a hint of condescension. "Dancing with Colonel Bantry, as I recall. The ballroom was a whirl of motion, gowns, music, laughter. I saw Beatrice with Mr. Hargrove, twirling about as if she owned the world. Her earrings were catching the light, I'll grant you that, but I was far too occupied to notice anything amiss." She paused, her lips curving into a thin smile. "I'm not in the habit of watching other women's jewellery." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes fixed on her knitting, but her mind attuned to Clara's words. The widow's tone was polished, her denial swift, yet there was a brittleness to it, like porcelain under strain. Miss Marple had known women like Clara in St. Mary Mead, proud, ambitious, quick to assert their status, yet nursing private wounds. Clara's wealth, once the talk of the county, had dwindled after a disastrous investment in a railway scheme, a fact whispered among the guests. Could such a loss, Miss Marple wondered, have driven her to covet Beatrice's heirloom? Sir Henry leaned forward, his pencil poised. "You say you were dancing with Colonel Bantry. Did you notice anyone else near Lady Beatrice? The waiter, perhaps? Or Mr. Vale, the jeweller?" Clara's eyes narrowed slightly, and she adjusted the diamond necklace with a deliberate gesture. That nervous boy, Thomas Reed, was skulking about with his tray, but he kept his distance. As for Mr. Vale, I saw him near the sideboard, chatting with some dowager about a brooch, or some such nonsense. He's always selling something, that man. Her voice carried a trace of disdain, but Miss Marple noted the way her gaze flicked toward the library door, as if expecting Beatrice to reappear. "If you're asking whether I saw someone snatch the earring, the answer is no. I was too busy dancing to play detective." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression serene, but her thoughts racing. Clara's dismissal of Thomas and Vale was too quick, too practised, and her mention of Beatrice's earrings catching the light suggested she had noticed them more than she let on. Miss Marple recalled a tea party in St. Mary Mead, where a woman's casual remark about a neighbour's new hat had betrayed a deep-seated envy. Envy, she knew, could fester into something far more dangerous. Clara's necklace, though splendid, was no match for the Ashford heirlooms in history or prestige. Might that disparity have stirred her to act? Sir Henry pressed further, his voice calm but insistent. You and Lady Beatrice are old acquaintances, I understand. Has there been any tension between you? Anything that might shed light on this matter? Clara's smile tightened, and for a moment her composure wavered. Tension? Really, Sir Henry, you make it sound so dramatic. Beatrice and I have known each other for years. Our families go back generations. We've had our differences, of course. Who hasn't? She's always been rather proud of those earrings, flaunting them at every opportunity. But I assure you, I have no interest in her trinkets. She leaned back, her fingers brushing the necklace again, as if to remind herself of her own wealth. Miss Marple's needles paused briefly. Clara's words were laced with a subtle venom, and her reference to Beatrice flaunting the earrings carried a sting. Miss Marple thought of a saint, Mary Mead widow, who had once coveted a neighbour's rose garden, her envy leading to a petty act of vandalism. Clara's financial troubles, though carefully concealed, were no secret to those who listened to gossip. A diamond earring, easily sold, could ease such burdens or fuel a desire to humble a rival. And your movements after the waltz? Sir Henry asked, his eyes steady on Clara's face. Did you stay in the ballroom, or perhaps step out to the terrace? Clara's gaze flickered, but she answered smoothly. I remained in the ballroom, chatting with Mrs. Hargrove about her dreadful new hat. I had no reason to go to the terrace. It was chilly, and I'm not fond of damp evening air. She smoothed her gown, her movements deliberate. If the earring was stolen, as Beatrice claims, it was likely someone with nimble fingers and a desperate motive. I suggest you look to the staff, Sir Henry. They're always hovering, aren't they? Miss Marple's lips twitched faintly. Clara's attempt to shift suspicion to the staff, Thomas Reed no doubt, was as transparent as it was calculated. Yet her mention of the terrace, unprompted, piqued Miss Marple's interest. Had Clara seen something there, or was she merely deflecting? The pearl bead Miss Marple had found near the French doors came to mind, a small clue, perhaps insignificant, but worth pursuing. Clara's poise, she thought, was a shield, and shields often hid vulnerabilities. Sir Henry jotted a note, his expression unreadable. Thank you, Mrs. Wentworth. We'll speak again if needed. Please wait in the drawing-room with the others. Clara rose, her gown rustling, and swept out of the library with a nod that bordered on dismissive. As the door closed, Sir Henry turned to Miss Marple, his brow furrowed. She's a cool customer, he said, but there's something she's not saying. Did you catch that jab at Beatrice? Miss Marple nodded, folding her knitting carefully. Oh yes, Henry. Mrs. Wentworth is a proud woman, and pride can be a brittle thing. She resents Beatrice, not just for the earrings, I think, but for what they represent. Status, history, things Clara's wealth cannot buy. And her quickness to point at the staff. It's a distraction, but not a clever one. She paused, her eyes bright with thought. We must learn more about her circumstances. A woman in her position, with debts mounting, might see a diamond as a lifeline. Sir Henry rubbed his chin, considering. You think she's desperate enough to steal? Desperation takes many forms, Miss Marple replied softly. In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a lady who stole a silver candlestick from a friend's dining room, not for money, but to prove she could. Clara's motives may be financial, or they may be personal. Either way, she's hiding something." Sir Henry nodded, his respect for Miss Marple's insight deepening. "We'll keep an eye on her. Next up is Vale, the jeweller. If anyone knows how to slip an earring off without a fuss, it's him." He moved to summon the next suspect, while Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her mind weaving through the threads of Clara's testimony. The widow's pride, her subtle barbs, her restless fingers. They all pointed to a woman under pressure, perhaps one step away from a reckless act. The terrace, the bead, the fleeting glances, Miss Marple tucked these details away, knowing that the truth, like a dropped stitch, would reveal itself in time. Chapter 5. The Jeweller's Craft. The library door opened with a soft creak, and Mr. Gideon Vale entered. His wiry frame clad in a meticulously tailored suit that spoke of both taste and precision. His sharp features, framed by neatly combed silver hair, gave him the air of a man who thrived on detail. And the watch chain glinting at his waist suggested a profession where seconds and carats were equally precious. He carried himself with a quiet confidence. But Miss Jane Marple, seated in her armchair with her knitting needles clicking steadily, noted the faintest tightening of his jaw as he met Sir Henry Clithering's gaze. His hands, gloved in fine leather, rested lightly on the arms of the chair as he sat, but one finger tapped almost imperceptibly. A small tell, Miss Marple thought, of a man not entirely at ease. Sir Henry, standing by the oak desk with his notepad open, wasted no time. "Mr. Vale," he began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "You appraised Lady Beatrice's earrings only a week ago. You're familiar with their design and value. Can you tell us about your movements during the gala, particularly around the time of the waltz when the earring went missing?" Vale inclined his head, his expression smooth as polished stone. "Of course, Sir Henry," he said, his voice low and measured, with a trace of a London accent smoothed by years among the gentry. "I was invited to the gala as a guest, though I confess my presence is often professional as well as social. Lady Beatrice asked me to appraise her earrings last week. As she considered insuring them, they are exquisite. Flawless 1-carat diamonds set in platinum, with clasps designed to withstand even the most vigorous dance. I assured her they were secure." He paused, his eyes flicking briefly to Miss Marple, who appeared absorbed in her knitting, but was, in fact, watching him closely. "And your movements?" Sir Henry prompted, his pencil poised. Vale's lips curved into a faint smile, though it did not reach his eyes. "I spent much of the evening circulating, as one does at such events. I spoke with several guests, Mrs. Hargrove about a sapphire brooch, Lord Pennington about a watch repair. During the waltz, I was near the sideboard, discussing a potential commission with Mrs. Wentworth. I recall seeing Lady Beatrice dancing with Mr. Hargrove, her earrings catching the chandelier light. I noticed nothing unusual, though the room was crowded, and my attention was elsewhere." Miss Marple's needles moved rhythmically, her mind sifting through Vale's words. His account was precise, almost too precise, as if rehearsed. She recalled a jeweller in St. Mary Mead who had once been caught switching paste for real stones, his calm demeanour masking a calculating mind. Vale's profession gave him intimate knowledge of the earrings, their value, their clasps, and, crucially, how to remove them swiftly. She noted, too, his mention of Mrs. Wentworth, a subtle alignment with her story that felt deliberate. Was he corroborating her, or ensuring their accounts matched? Sir Henry leaned forward, his eyes steady. You say the clasps were secure. Could the earring have come loose accidentally, perhaps during the dance? Vale shook his head, his expression one of professional certainty. Highly unlikely, Sir Henry. The clasps are spring-loaded, designed to lock firmly. To remove the earring would require a deliberate twist and pull, not something that happens by chance, even in a lively waltz. If it's gone, it was taken intentionally. His voice was firm, but Miss Marple caught the faintest tremor when he spoke of the clasp, as if the topic unsettled him. "And where were you after the waltz?" Sir Henry asked, his tone sharpening. "Did you step out to the terrace, perhaps, or remain in the ballroom?" Vale's finger stopped tapping, and he clasped his hands together, his gloves creaking softly. "I remained in the ballroom," he said. "After my conversation with Mrs. Wentworth, I spoke with Colonel Bantry about a cufflink he'd damaged. I had no reason to go to the terrace. It's not my habit to wander outdoors during such events." He offered a small smile, but Miss Marple noted the way his eyes darted toward the library window, which overlooked the terrace beyond. Miss Marple's needles paused for a moment, her thoughts turning to the terrace. She had seen Vale near the French doors during the waltz, his hand resting on a velvet case in his pocket, a case that might hold tools, or perhaps something more incriminating. A jeweller, she mused, would know exactly how to slip an earring into such a case and spirit it away. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead's shopkeeper, who had once hidden stolen goods in a hollowed-out ledger, his expertise making him bold. Vale's composure, she suspected, masked a similar boldness. Sir Henry jotted a note, his brow furrowed. "You're certain you saw nothing unusual? No one lingering too close to Lady Beatrice? No odd behaviour from the staff?" Vale hesitated, just long enough for Miss Marple to notice. "Well," he said, his tone careful, "there was that young waiter, Thomas Reed, I believe. He seemed out of place, hovering near the dancers with an empty tray. I thought it odd, but I assumed he was simply inexperienced." He shrugged, a gesture that seemed calculated to dismiss the observation as trivial. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Vale's mention of Thomas echoed Clara Wentworth's, a pattern that felt less like coincidence and more like a concerted effort to deflect suspicion. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead where two neighbours had independently accused a gardener of theft, only to be revealed as conspirators themselves. Vale's expertise and opportunity made him a compelling suspect, but his quickness to point at Thomas suggested a deeper game. Sir Henry closed his notepad, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Mr. Vale. We may need to speak with you again. Please join the others in the drawing-room." Vale rose, his movements fluid, and offered a polite nod before exiting, his watch chain glinting as he passed the firelight. As the door closed, Sir Henry turned to Miss Marple, his voice low. "He's smooth, I'll give him that," he said. "But there's something off about him. That business about the clasps. Too certain, too quick. What do you make of it, Jane?" Miss Marple set her knitting in her lap, her eyes thoughtful. "Mr. Vale is a man who lives by precision, Henry," she said softly. "He knows the value of things, diamonds, time, reputation. His story is tidy, but tidiness can be a mask. He was near the terrace during the waltz. I saw him myself, though he denies leaving the ballroom. And that velvet case in his pocket. It could hold a jeweller's tools, or it could hold a stolen earring. She paused, her lips twitching into a faint smile. In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a watchmaker who stole a cameo brooch simply because he could. Mr. Vale has the skill and the opportunity, but whether he has the motive, that we must discover. Sir Henry nodded, his respect for her insight evident. He's got the means, no question. And if he's been appraising those earrings, he'd know their worth and how to sell them discreetly. Let's see what the waiter has to say. Young Thomas seems to be everyone's favourite scapegoat. As Sir Henry moved to summon Thomas Reed, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her mind weaving through Vale's testimony. His polished manner, his careful deflection, his fleeting glance at the terrace, they were threads in a tapestry not yet complete. The pearl bead she had found near the French doors lingered in her thoughts, a small clue that might connect to Vale's velvet case, or to something else entirely. She knew the truth lay in the details, and as the fire crackled in the library, she felt the pattern of the theft beginning to take shape. Chapter 6. The Waiter's Shadow. The library door opened hesitantly, admitting Thomas Reed, the young waiter whose pale face and trembling hands betrayed his nerves before he uttered a word. His black uniform, though neatly pressed, bore the faint marks of wear, frayed cuffs, a slightly faded collar that spoke of a life eked out on meagre wages. His eyes, wide and dark, darted between Sir Henry Clithering, standing at the oak desk with his notepad, and Miss Jane Marple, seated in her armchair, her knitting needles moving in their quiet, relentless rhythm. To Thomas she was merely an elderly guest, her presence unthreatening, but Miss Marple's sharp gaze missed nothing. The sweat beading on his brow, the way his fingers twisted together, the slight hunch of his shoulders as if bracing for a blow. Sir Henry gestured for Thomas to sit, his tone firm but not unkind. "Mr. Reed," he began, "you were working in the ballroom during the gala. Serving drinks, I understand. Lady Beatrice's earring went missing during the waltz. Can you tell us where you were and what you saw?" Thomas sank into the chair, his hands gripping the armrests. I was doing my job, sir," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, "carrying a tray of champagne, moving through the guests. I didn't go near Lady Beatrice, not once. I was on the other side of the room, near the musicians, when the waltz was playing." His words tumbled out, too quick, and he swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes fixed on her knitting, but her mind attuned to Thomas's every gesture. She had seen him during the waltz, not near the musicians, but closer to Lady Beatrice, his tray empty, his steps hesitant as he lingered near the dancers. His denial, she thought, was not merely fear. It was a shield, hastily constructed and already cracking. In St. Mary Mead, she had known a boy who stole apples from a neighbour's orchard. His lies betrayed by the same nervous fidgeting Thomas now displayed. Desperation, she knew, could drive even the meekest to crime. Sir Henry leaned forward, his eyes steady. "You're certain you were nowhere near Lady Beatrice? Several people have mentioned seeing you with a tray, circling the dancers. It's a large room, Thomas, but not so large that you'd go unnoticed." Thomas's face flushed, and he shook his head vehemently. "I wasn't near her, sir. I swear it. I was just serving drinks. I didn't see nothing. Nobody taking an earring, nothing like that." His voice cracked, and he wiped his palms on his trousers, leaving faint damp marks. "I'm just a waiter, sir. I wouldn't know how to steal something like that, even if I wanted to." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression serene, but her thoughts racing. Thomas's insistence on his distance from Beatrice felt rehearsed, and his claim of ignorance about the earrings' theft was undermined by his visible panic. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Gardner, who had stolen a silver spoon, his guilt revealed not by what he said, but by what he avoided saying. Thomas's worn uniform and scuffed shoes suggested financial strain, a motive as old as crime itself. A diamond earring, easily hidden and sold, could be a lifeline for a young man in debt. Sir Henry's voice sharpened. "Thomas, you were seen near the French doors leading to the terrace at one point. Did you step outside during the evening, perhaps to clear your head or deliver something?" Thomas's eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed to struggle for words. "No, sir," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "I didn't go outside. I stayed in the ballroom all night. It was busy, glasses to clear, trays to refill. I didn't have time to wander off." He glanced at the floor, his fingers twisting together again, and Miss Marple noted the way his gaze avoided the window overlooking the terrace, as if it held a secret he dared not face. The terrace, she thought, was becoming a recurring thread in this mystery. Lady Beatrice had paused there. Clara Wentworth had dismissed it. Gideon Vale had denied visiting it. And now Thomas was adamant he had not left the ballroom. Yet the pearl bead Miss Marple had found near the French doors, small, unassuming, possibly from a servant's uniform, suggested someone had been there, perhaps in haste. Thomas's nervousness, she mused, could stem from guilt, fear, or simply the weight of being the lowliest suspect in a room of wealth and privilege. Sir Henry jotted a note, his brow furrowed. "You understand, Thomas, that a valuable jewel is missing, and we must consider everyone who was present. If you know anything at all, it's best to tell us now." Thomas shook his head, his voice rising in pitch. "I don't know nothing, sir. I'm not a thief. I just want to do my job and go home." His eyes darted to Miss Marple, as if seeking an ally, but her mild expression offered no reassurance. She was watching him closely, noting the sheen of sweat on his upper lip, the way his foot tapped against the floor. Fear, she knew, could be as revealing as a confession. Sir Henry closed his notepad, his tone measured. "Very well, Thomas. You may go for now, but stay in the drawing-room with the others. We'll speak again if needed." Thomas rose, his movements jerky, and hurried from the library, his shoulders hunched as if expecting pursuit. As the door closed, Sir Henry turned to Miss Marple, his expression a mix of frustration and curiosity. "He's frightened out of his wits," he said, rubbing his chin. "But is it guilt, or just the terror of being questioned by his betters? What do you think, Jane?" Miss Marple set her knitting in her lap, her eyes thoughtful. "Young Thomas is hiding something, Henry," she said softly. "His story doesn't hold. I saw him near Lady Beatrice during the waltz, not by the musicians. And his fear is more than just nerves. He's a boy in trouble, I'd wager, perhaps with debts or obligations pressing him hard. In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a lad who stole a bicycle to pay off a loan shark. He was a good boy at heart, but desperation makes thieves of us all." She paused, her lips pursing slightly. "The terrace bothers me, Henry. He denies being there, but his eyes betrayed him when you mentioned it. We must look closer at that spot." Sir Henry nodded, his respect for her insight evident. "You're right about the terrace. It keeps coming up. And Thomas, is the weakest link, the one everyone's quick to blame. But that makes me wonder if he's being set up. He glanced at the door, where the silhouettes of the other suspects could be seen in the drawing room beyond. Let's organize the search of the ballroom and terrace. If that earring's still here, we'll find it. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her mind weaving through Thomas's testimony. His panic, his denials, his worn shoes. They painted a picture of a young man cornered by circumstance. The pearl bead, the terrace, the empty tray during the waltz. These were clues, small but insistent, pointing to a moment of opportunity. As the fire crackled in the library, Miss Marple felt the threads of the mystery tightening, drawing her closer to the truth hidden in the waiter's shadow. Chapter 7. Clues in the Candlelight. The library, with its warm firelight and the faint must of old books, seemed to close in around Miss Jane Marple as she sat, her knitting needles idle for a moment in her lap. The interviews had concluded, and Sir Henry Clithering, his notepad tucked away, was organising a search of the ballroom with the efficiency of a man who had once commanded Scotland Yard. Yet Miss Marple's mind lingered on the threads of testimony she had gathered. Lady Beatrice's calculated distress, Clara Wentworth's veiled resentment, Gideon Vale's polished precision, and Thomas Reed's palpable fear. Each had woven a story, but none, she suspected, had revealed the whole truth. The diamond earring, that glittering prize, was still missing, and Miss Marple knew that the key to its recovery lay not just in words, but in the silent traces left behind. As Sir Henry rallied the footman to begin the search, Miss Marple slipped quietly from the library, her black dress and lace shawl rendering her nearly invisible among the bustling staff and murmuring guests. The ballroom, though still aglow with chandelier light, had lost its festive air. The guests huddled in clusters, their whispers sharp with speculation. Lady Beatrice stood by the fireplace, her single earring catching the light as she accepted sympathetic murmurs from Mrs. Hargrove. Clara Wentworth, seated near the grand piano, toyed with her diamond necklace, her eyes darting toward Beatrice with a mix of disdain and curiosity. Gideon Vale lingered by the sideboard, his gloved hands clasped, while Thomas Reed moved among the tables, clearing glasses with a nervous haste that drew Miss Marple's attention. She made her way toward the French doors leading to the terrace, her steps deliberate but unhurried. The doors, framed in gilt and flanked by heavy damask curtains, stood slightly ajar, letting in a breath of cool night air. It was here, during the gala, that Lady Beatrice had paused for air, and here Miss Marple suspected that the earring might have vanished. She bent down, her eyes scanning the polished floor, and there, tucked into a fold of the carpet just inside the threshold, was the pearl bead she had noticed earlier. She retrieved it with care, holding it to the light. It was small, lustrous, and out of place, neither part of Beatrice's emerald gown nor Clara's sapphire ensemble. Could it belong to a servant's uniform, she wondered, or was it a deliberate plant meant to mislead? Miss Marple stepped onto the terrace, the stone cool beneath her feet. The night was clear, with a crescent moon casting faint shadows across the balustrade. The terrace overlooked a rose garden, its blooms ghostly in the moonlight, and beyond that, the dark expanse of Willow Hall's grounds. She moved to the balustrade, her fingers brushing the rough stone, and noticed faint scuff marks, as if someone had leaned heavily or perhaps climbed over. Her eyes narrowed. The marks were fresh, the stone slightly worn where a shoe might have scraped. She crouched, her joints protesting faintly, and examined the base of the balustrade. There, caught in a crack, was a tiny thread of black fabric, no larger than a blade of grass. It matched the hue of the waiters' uniforms, she noted, but it could also belong to any number of dark garments worn that evening. Her mind turned to Thomas Reed, whose nervous denial of visiting the terrace had rung false. The thread could be his, dropped in a moment of haste, but Miss Marple cautioned herself against jumping to conclusions. In St. Mary Mead, she had once found a button near a pilfered pie, only to learn it belonged not to the thief, but to a child playing nearby. Clues, she knew, were only as reliable as the context in which they were found. She pocketed the thread alongside the pearl bead and turned her attention to the rose garden below. The path was gravel, unlikely to hold footprints, but she resolved to inspect it in daylight, when subtler traces might be visible. Returning to the ballroom, Miss Marple observed the search in progress. Footmen, under Sir Henry's direction, were checking beneath tables, behind curtains, and along the edges of the dance floor. Guests watched with a mix of curiosity and unease, some offering half-hearted assistance, others whispering theories about the thief. Miss Marple's gaze settled on Gideon Vale, who stood apart, his eyes fixed on the French doors. Was he watching for something, or someone? She recalled his velvet case, glimpsed during the waltz, and wondered if it might hold more than jeweller's tools. Clara Wentworth, meanwhile, had risen from her seat and was speaking to Colonel Bantry, her laughter a touch too bright, as if to dispel suspicion. Lady Beatrice, by contrast, remained near the fireplace, her expression a blend of fragility and defiance, her hand occasionally touching the remaining earring, as if to reassure herself it was still there. Miss Marple approached Sir Henry, who was overseeing a footman's examination of a potted fern. "Anything yet, Henry?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. He shook his head, his expression grim. "Nothing so far, Jane. The earring's not on the floor, nor in any obvious hiding place. If it was dropped, it's well hidden, or it's not here at all." He glanced at the French doors, his thoughts aligning with hers. "I'm starting to think the terrace is our best bet. Beatrice was there, and it's a likely spot for a thief to slip away." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes bright with thought. "The terrace is worth a closer look," she said. "I found a thread there, black, like the waiters' uniforms, and those scuff marks on the balustrade suggest someone was in a hurry. But we must be careful, Henry. Clues can be misleading, placed to point us in the wrong direction." She paused, her lips pursing slightly. In St. Mary Mead, a stolen necklace was found in a maid's room, but it was the mistress who had hidden it there to cast blame. We must watch all of them, Thomas, Vale, Mrs. Wentworth, even Beatrice herself. Sir Henry raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You think Beatrice might be involved?" "I think," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild, "that people are rarely what they seem. Beatrice's distress is real, but it's layered, like a cake with too many flavors. She may know more than she's saying, or she may be protecting someone, or something." She adjusted her shawl, her mind turning to the pearl bead in her pocket. "The bead I found doesn't match anything I've seen tonight. It's a small thing, but small things often lead to the truth." Sir Henry nodded, his respect for her growing. "I'll have the terrace searched at first light," he said. "For now, we'll keep the suspects under watch. Thomas is the obvious target. Everyone's pointing at him. But that makes me suspicious. It's too neat. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Exactly, Henry. The obvious answer is rarely the right one. In St. Mary Mead, when a silver teapot went missing, everyone blamed the new curate, but it was the vicar's wife, hiding her own indiscretions. We must look beyond the surface. She glanced at the ballroom, where Thomas was now stacking glasses, his hands trembling. Young Thomas is frightened, but fear can come from many sources. Guilt, yes, but also the fear of being wrongly accused. As the search continued, Miss Marple returned to her corner. Her knitting resumed, but her mind racing. The pearl bead, the black thread, the scuff marks. They were fragments of a puzzle, each pointing to the terrace as a place of significance. She thought of Thomas's empty tray, Vale's velvet case, Clara's restless fingers, and Beatrice's calculated glances. The earring, she knew, was still within reach, hidden by someone who had seized a fleeting moment. As the chandelier light danced across the ballroom, Miss Marple felt the pattern of the theft sharpening, like a picture coming into focus, and she knew that the next clue would bring her closer to the truth. Chapter 8. Whispers of Motive. The morning after the gala dawned crisp and grey, with a mist clinging to the grounds of Willow Hall, softening the edges of the rose garden and muffling the distant calls of rooks. Inside, the grand house felt subdued, its opulence dimmed by the lingering shadow of the theft. Miss Jane Marple sat in the morning room, a modest space overlooking the terrace, where she sipped tea served in delicate bone china. Her knitting lay folded in her lap, a pretext for her presence, but her eyes were sharp, taking in the subdued movements of the household. The guests confined to the drawing-room under Sir Henry Clithering's watchful eye whispered among themselves, while the staff moved with the cautious efficiency of those aware they were under scrutiny. Miss Marple had requested a moment alone with Mrs. Gibbs, the housekeeper, whose years of service at Willow Hall made her a font of quiet observation. Mrs. Gibbs, a stout woman with greying hair pinned neatly beneath a cap, entered with a tray of fresh scones, her face etched with the weariness of a sleepless night. "You wanted a word, Miss Marple?" she asked, setting the tray down with a clink. "Yes, Mrs. Gibbs," Miss Marple replied, her voice gentle but purposeful. "You've been with the Ashfords for many years. Understand. You see things others might miss. Tell me, what do you know of young Thomas Reed, the waiter? He seemed rather distressed last night." Mrs. Gibbs hesitated, her hands smoothing her apron as she glanced toward the door. "Thomas is a good lad, miss," she said finally, her tone careful. "Hard-working, polite, though a bit shy. But he's been troubled lately. I've heard talk in the village. He's borrowed money from Mr. Carver, a lender not known for his kindness. Thomas has been pale, jumpy, like he's carrying a weight. I don't like to speak ill of him, but with that earring gone—" She trailed off, her lips pursing with worry. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene, but her mind cataloguing the information. Debt, she knew, was a powerful motive, one that had driven a St. Mary Mead grocer's boy to pilfer from the till to appease a ruthless creditor. Thomas's frayed cuffs and nervous demeanour now took on a sharper significance. "And Mr. Carver," she asked, "is he the sort to press a young man hard?" Mrs. Gibbs's eyes darkened. "Oh, hi, miss. He's a hard man, Carver. They say he's ruined more than one family in the county. Thomas wouldn't be the first to fall into his trap." She lowered her voice, leaning closer. "I saw Thomas last week, slipping out after his shift. looking like he was headed to meet someone. I didn't think much of it then, but now. Miss Marple's fingers brushed the pearl bead in her pocket, her thoughts turning to the terrace where she had found it, alongside the black thread that matched Thomas's uniform. "Thank you, Mrs. Gibbs," she said softly. "You've been most helpful. One more thing. Do the servants' uniforms here include pearl beads, perhaps on a cap or apron?" Mrs. Gibbs shook her head. "No, miss. Our uniforms are plain. Black for the men, grey for the maids, with no such finery. That bead you found, it's not one of ours." She hesitated, then added, "But I did see Mrs. Wentworth wearing a pearl-trimmed shawl last night, over her blue dress. Could it be hers?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. "Perhaps," she said, filing the detail away. "You've a sharp eye, Mrs. Gibbs. Keep it open, if you please." As the housekeeper left, Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind weaving through the new information. The bead, not from a servant's uniform, might belong to Clara Wentworth's shawl. A clue that shifted suspicion, or perhaps a clever misdirection. She resolved to examine Clara's attire more closely. Meanwhile, Sir Henry had summoned Miss Marple to the library, where he was reviewing notes from the previous night's interviews. The room, still warm from the dying embers in the grate, felt like a sanctuary from the tension of the house. Sir Henry sat at the desk, his brow furrowed as he flipped through his notepad. "Jane," he said, looking up as she entered, "I've had a word with the local constable about our suspects. There's something on Gideon Vale you'll want to hear." Miss Marple settled into her armchair. Her knitting resumed as a cover for her keen attention. "Do tell Henry," she said, her voice mild but expectant. Sir Henry leaned back, his expression grim. "Vale's name came up in a London case a few years back. Nothing proven, mind you. But he was suspected of fencing stolen gems. A ruby necklace vanished from a Mayfair townhouse, and Vale's shop was linked to its sale. Though he claimed he'd bought it in good faith, the police couldn't pin it on him. But the suspicion lingers. A man like that, with his skills and connections, could easily move a diamond earring." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her mind turning over this new thread. Vale's polished demeanour and intimate knowledge of the earrings made him a compelling suspect, but his quickness to point at Thomas Reed suggested a man deflecting attention. "A jeweller with a questionable past," she mused aloud. "In St. Mary Mead, we had a silversmith who once melted down stolen candlesticks. He was charming, plausible, but his hands gave him away, always fidgeting with his tools. Mr. Vale's gloves, I noticed, hide his hands, but that tap of his finger betrays a certain unease." Sir Henry nodded, impressed. "You caught that, did you?" "He's slick, but not slick enough." "And then there's Mrs. Wentworth. The constable mentioned her financial troubles, common knowledge in the county, it seems. That railway venture she backed went bust, and she's been selling off paintings to keep up appearances. A diamond earring would be a tidy sum for her." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "Clara's pride is her armour, Henry, but it's cracked." Her jabs at Beatrice, her restless fingers on that necklace. They speak of a woman who feels her status slipping, yet she's clever, too clever to leave an obvious trail. That pearl bead, if it's from her shawl, could be a mistake, or a deliberate plant to confuse us. She paused, her eyes narrowing. And Beatrice herself. Her distress is real, but there's a calculation in it, a sense of staging. I wonder if she's protecting someone, or perhaps hiding a motive of her own. Sir Henry rubbed his chin, his gaze thoughtful. You think Beatrice might have orchestrated this? To what end? Not orchestrated, perhaps, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but deliberate. But she knows more than she's saying. Her glance at Clara during the interviews, her quickness to name Thomas. It's as if she's directing our attention. In St. Mary Mead, a lady once claimed her pearls were stolen, only to have hidden them herself to claim insurance. Beatrice's earrings are insured, I presume. Sir Henry's eyes widened. They are, according to her butler. A hefty policy, taken out just last month after Vale's appraisal. You think she might be playing a deeper game? Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. I think we must consider all possibilities, Henry. Beatrice's distress is genuine, but it may serve a purpose. Clara's envy, Vale's past, Thomas's debts, they all point to motives, but motives alone don't make a thief. We need evidence, and the terrace is where we'll find it. Sir Henry rose, his expression determined. I'll have the terrace searched thoroughly this morning. That thread you found, and those scuff marks, they're our best lead. And I'll keep a close eye on our suspects. Thomas is shaking like a leaf. Vale's too calm, and Clara's too sharp. Beatrice, well, I'll watch her closely. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already turning to the rose garden below the terrace, where the black thread and scuff marks hinted at a hurried escape. Be thorough, Henry, she said, and look for what's not there as much as what is. In St. Mary Mead, a stolen locket was found because the thief forgot to cover his tracks in the mud. Our thief may have been careless too. As Sir Henry left to organize the search, Miss Marple remained in the morning room, her tea cooling as she pondered the motives laid bare. Thomas's debts, Vale's shady history, Clara's financial strain, Beatrice's calculated grief, each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. The pearl bead, the black thread, the terrace, they were signposts, pointing to a moment of opportunity seized in the candlelight. As the mist outside began to lift, Miss Marple felt the truth drawing closer, hidden in the whispers of motive and the shadows of Willow Hall. Chapter 9. The Terrace Trail. The morning mist had burned away, leaving the grounds of Willow Hall bathed in a pale, watery light. The rose garden, with its neatly trimmed bushes and gravel paths, stretched out below the terrace, its colours muted under the grey sky. Miss Jane Marple stood at the balustrade, her lace shawl drawn tightly against the chill, her eyes scanning the stone and the garden beyond. The terrace, with its weathered flags and ivy-clad railings, had become the fulcrum of her suspicions. A place where Lady Beatrice had paused, where Thomas Reed had denied being, and where clues, however small, pointed to a moment of theft. Her fingers brushed the pearl bead and black thread in her pocket, their significance still elusive but insistent. Sir Henry Clithering joined her, his overcoat buttoned against the morning air, his expression one of determined focus. "I've got 2 footmen combing the terrace and garden," he said, gesturing to the men who were methodically searching the stonework and peering beneath the roses. "If that earring was dropped or hidden out here, we'll find it. But I'm not holding my breath, Jane. This feels like a deliberate act, not a careless loss." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze fixed on the scuff marks she had noticed the previous night. "I agree, Henry," she said softly. "The earring was taken, and the terrace is where the thief likely made their move. Those marks on the balustrade, see how they're fresh, as if someone leaned heavily or scrambled over. And the black thread I found, caught in the rose thorns below, suggests haste." She pointed to the spot where the thread had been snagged, now marked by a footman's careful inspection. It matches the waiters' uniforms, but we mustn't assume it's Thomas Reed's. Anyone could wear black, and anyone could have left it to mislead us. Sir Henry rubbed his chin, his eyes following her gesture. "You're thinking someone's trying to point us at the boy," he said. "Clara Wentworth and Gideon Vale both mentioned him. Quick as you like. It's too neat, isn't it?" Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Far too neat, Henry. In St. Mary Mead, when a silver tray went missing, everyone blamed the scullery maid, because her apron was found near the scene. But it was the butler who'd planted it, to cover his own theft. We must look beyond the obvious." She stepped closer to the balustrade, her eyes narrowing as she examined the scuff marks. They were shallow but distinct, the stone slightly abraded where a shoe, or perhaps a knee, had scraped against it. "Someone moved quickly here," she murmured, "perhaps to hide something, or to escape notice." The footmen, under Sir Henry's direction, had begun searching the rose garden, their gloved hands parting the thorny branches with care. One of them, a young man named Perkins, called out, "Sir, there's something here!" He held up a small object, glinting faintly in the morning light. A metal button, embossed with a simple crest. Sir Henry took it, turning it over in his hand. "Not from a waiter's uniform," he said, frowning. "Their buttons are plain brass. This looks like it's from a gentleman's coat, or perhaps a lady's cloak." Miss Marple leaned closer, her eyes sharp. "May I see it, Henry?" she asked. He handed her the button, and she examined it closely, noting the crest, a stylized hawk, worn but recognizable. "This could belong to anyone among the guests," she said, "or it might have been here before the gala. But its placement, caught in the roses just below the scuff marks, suggests it was dropped last night." She paused, her mind turning to the suspects. Gideon Vale's tailored suit had borne no such crested buttons, and Clara Wentworth's sapphire gown had been fastened with hooks, not buttons. Lady Beatrice's emerald dress had been unadorned, but Miss Marple recalled a dark cloak she had worn briefly when stepping onto the terrace. Could it be hers, or another's? Sir Henry pocketed the button, his expression thoughtful. "We'll check the guests' outerwear," he said. "If this matches someone's cloak or coat, it places them here, and that's a step closer to the truth." He glanced at the footmen, who were now sifting through the gravel path. "Anything else out there?" Perkins shook his head. "No sign of the earring, sir. We've checked every bush, every crevice. If it was hidden here, it's well concealed, or it's gone." Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the garden's edge, where the gravel gave way to a low hedge. "If I were a thief," she said softly, "and I'd taken the earring on the terrace, I wouldn't keep it on me. Too risky, with a search likely. I'd hide it somewhere close, somewhere I could retrieve it later." She pointed to a stone urn at the corner of the terrace, its base half hidden by ivy. "That urn, for instance. It's out of sight, but easily accessible." Sir Henry followed her gaze, his eyes lighting with interest. "Good thinking, Jane." He signalled to Perkins, who hurried to the urn and began probing its base, his fingers sifting through the soil and leaves. After a moment, he shook his head. "Nothing here, sir. Just dirt and a few pebbles." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, but she was undeterred. "Then we must widen the search," she said. "The earring may be further afield, or it may still be in the house. But the terrace tells us something, Henry. Someone was here in a hurry, and they left traces, The thread, the button, the scuff marks. We're closer than we were." Sir Henry nodded, his respect for her insight evident. "You're right, Jane. This terrace is the key. I'll have the footman check the hedges and the paths beyond, in case the thief tossed the earring further out." He paused, his voice lowering. "What do you make of our suspects now? Thomas is still the favourite scapegoat, but this button complicates things." Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her mind weaving through the clues. Thomas is frightened, and his denial of being on the terrace doesn't hold, given the black thread. But the button suggests someone else was here, someone with access to finer clothing. Clara Wentworth's pearl-trimmed shawl could explain the bead I found, but her gown had no buttons. Gideon Vale's suit was impeccable, but I didn't notice a crest on his coat. And Beatrice, her cloak might bear such a button, and her pause on the terrace places her here at the critical moment. She paused, her eyes bright with thought. In St. Mary Mead, a stolen brooch was found because the thief hid it in a flower pot, thinking it safe. Our thief may have done the same, or they may have passed the earring to an accomplice. Sir Henry raised an eyebrow. An accomplice? That's a new angle? Not so new, Miss Marple replied, her tone mild. In St. Mary Mead, a pair of maids once worked together to steal a silver teapot, one distracting the guests while the other hid the prize. If Thomas is involved, he may not be alone. Or he may be a pawn, used by someone cleverer. Vale, perhaps, with his jeweller's skills. Or Clara, with her need for funds. She glanced at the urn again, her mind lingering on its possibilities. We must watch them all, Henry, and we must search their rooms if we can. The earring may still be in the house. Sir Henry nodded, his expression determined. I'll arrange discreet searches of the suspect's belongings, with Beatrice's permission. And I'll have the staff keep an eye on Thomas, Vale, and Mrs. Wentworth. If one of them makes a move, we'll know it. He glanced at the terrace, where the footmen were now examining the hedges. You've got a nose for this, Jane. That button and thread, they're more than we had yesterday. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. Clues are like stitches, Henry. One alone seems small, but together they form a pattern. The terrace is telling us a story, and we're only beginning to read it. She turned back to the house, her thoughts on the suspects waiting inside. Thomas's fear, Vale's composure, Clara's pride, Beatrice's grief, each was a thread, and the button, the bead, the scuff marks were knots tying them together. As the morning light grew stronger, Miss Marple felt the trail leading her closer to the truth, hidden somewhere along the terrace's silent stones. Chapter 10. The Trap is Set. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Willow Hall's manicured lawns, its light filtering through the tall windows of the drawing-room where the guests and suspects had been confined under Sir Henry Clithering's watchful eye. The air was thick with tension, the previous night's glamour replaced by a restless unease, as whispered speculations circulated among the gathered elite. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a high-backed chair near a bay window, appeared to be engrossed in her knitting, her needles clicking with a soothing rhythm that belied the sharpness of her observations. Her mind, however, was far from idle, weaving together the threads of clues, the pearl bead, the black thread, the crested button, the scuff marks on the terrace, into a pattern that was beginning to take shape. The morning's search of the terrace and rose garden had yielded no earring, but the button, with its hawk crest, had deepened the mystery. Sir Henry, after consulting with Lady Beatrice, had secured permission to discreetly search the suspect's rooms, a task assigned to trusted footmen under the guise of routine housekeeping. Yet Miss Marple knew that a thief bold enough to steal a diamond earring in a crowded ballroom would be cautious enough to hide it well, or to move it quickly. The terrace remained the focal point of her suspicions, a place where opportunity and haste had converged. But she also suspected the thief might still be watching, waiting for a chance to retrieve their prize. As Sir Henry joined her in the drawing-room, his expression a mix of determination and frustration, Miss Marple set her knitting aside and leaned forward. "Henry," she said softly, her voice low to avoid the ears of nearby guests. "We've questioned them, searched the grounds, and found clues that point to the terrace. But the earring is still hidden, and our thief is likely growing anxious. We need to draw them out, to give them a chance to betray themselves." Sir Henry's eyes lit with interest. "A trap, Jane. What do you have in mind?" Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. "A simple gathering this evening, here in the drawing-room. Let Lady Beatrice wear her remaining earring prominently, as if she's determined to carry on despite the theft. The thief, whoever they are, will be watching, either to gloat or to fear discovery. If we create a moment of distraction, they may make a move to retrieve the earring, or reveal themselves through their nerves." She paused, her eyes bright with calculation. "In St. Mary Mead, we once caught a thief by staging a tea party, leaving a purse unattended to see who reached for it. People, Henry, cannot resist their own impulses when tempted." Sir Henry nodded, his respect for her cunning evident. "Brilliant, Jane. We'll arrange it. A small event, music, drinks, enough to loosen tongues and lower guards. I'll have the footman keep a close watch on Thomas Vale and Mrs. Wentworth. Beatrice, too. She's not above suspicion, as you've pointed out." He glanced across the room, where the suspects were scattered among the guests. Lady Beatrice sat near the fireplace, her single earring glinting as she spoke with Mrs. Hargrove. Clara Wentworth, in a burgundy dress, sipped tea with a forced smile, her eyes darting toward Beatrice. Gideon Vale stood by a bookcase, flipping through a volume with an air of detachment, while Thomas Reed moved among the guests, serving tea with hands that trembled slightly. The evening was arranged with swift efficiency. Lady Beatrice, informed of the plan, agreed with a mixture of reluctance and resolve, her pride stung by the need to play a role in her own house. The drawing-room was transformed into a stage for the trap. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Servants circulated with trays of sherry and canapes, and the chandelier cast a warm glow over the assembled company. Beatrice, resplendent in a sapphire gown, wore her remaining diamond earring with deliberate prominence, its sparkle a silent challenge to the thief. Miss Marple, seated near the French doors that led to the terrace, kept her knitting in her lap, her eyes scanning the room with the quiet vigilance of a hawk. As the evening unfolded, the guests mingled, their conversation strained but polite. Miss Marple watched the suspects closely. Clara Wentworth, now in a burgundy gown with a pearl-trimmed shawl, laughed too loudly at Colonel Bantry's jest, her fingers brushing the pearls as if to reassure herself. Gideon Vale, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, lingered near the sideboard, his gloved hands occasionally touching the velvet case in his pocket, a habit Miss Marple had noted before. Thomas Reed, serving drinks, moved with a jerky caution, his eyes darting toward Beatrice's earring whenever he passed her. Beatrice herself played her part well, her laughter bright, but her glances sharp, as if searching for a betrayer among her guests. Miss Marple's plan hinged on a moment of controlled chaos. At her suggestion, Sir Henry had arranged for a footman to accidentally drop a tray of glasses near the terrace doors, creating a distraction that would draw eyes and loosen inhibitions. As the quartet struck up a lively tune, the footman Perkins executed the plan with a convincing stumble, sending a cascade of crystal crashing to the floor. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs, guests turning to see the commotion, servants rushing to clean up. Miss Marple, unnoticed in her corner, watched the suspect's reactions with keen intensity. Clara Wentworth flinched, her hand tightening on her shawl, but she remained seated, her eyes flicking toward the terrace doors. Gideon Vale stepped back from the sideboard, his expression unreadable, but his hand slipping into his pocket, as if to check the contents of his velvet case. Lady Beatrice turned toward the noise, her hand instinctively touching her earring, her face a mask of poised alarm. But it was Thomas Reed who caught Miss Marple's attention. He froze, his tray wobbling, and then, with a glance at Beatrice, he muttered an excuse and slipped toward the pantry door, his movement swift but unsteady. Miss Marple rose quietly, her shawl draped over her arm, and followed at a discreet distance, her steps muffled by the thick carpet. The pantry, a small room off the drawing room, was where servants prepared trays and stored supplies. As she approached, she saw Thomas standing by a counter, his back to her, his hands fumbling with something in his pocket. She paused in the doorway, her voice soft but clear. "Thomas, dear, is something troubling you?" He spun around, his face ashen, and a small object fell from his hand, clattering to the floor. It was not the earring, but a jeweller's loop, a small magnifying lens used to inspect gems. Thomas's eyes widened in panic and he stammered, It's not what you think, miss. I was just holding it for someone." Miss Marple's expression remained mild, but her mind raced. The loop, a tool associated with Gideon Vale, was a damning clue in Thomas's possession. Had he taken it to examine the stolen earring, or was he holding it for another? "For whom, Thomas?" she asked gently, stepping closer. "You're in trouble, I can see that. It's best to tell the truth now." Thomas's shoulders slumped, his voice barely a whisper. "I can't say, miss. I found it, that's all. I wasn't stealing nothing." His eyes darted toward the drawing room, where the quartet's music masked the clatter of the clean-up. Miss Marple nodded, her tone soothing but firm. "Very well, Thomas, but you'll need to speak with Sir Henry. Come along now." She guided him back to the drawing room, where Sir Henry was overseeing the footman's efforts to restore order. She handed him the loop, her voice low. "Found in Thomas's possession, Henry. It's a jeweller's tool, not something a waiter would carry." Sir Henry's eyes narrowed as he examined the loop, his mind aligning with hers. "Veils, most likely," he murmured. "This ties them together, Jane, but it's not the earring." He glanced at Thomas, who stood trembling, his eyes fixed on the floor. "We're getting closer." Miss Marple returned to her seat. Her knitting resumed, but her thoughts racing. The loop was a clue, not the solution, but it pointed to a connection between Thomas and Vale, or perhaps a frame to cast suspicion on the boy. The terrace, the button, the bead, the thread, each was a piece of the puzzle, and the trap had stirred the thief's nerves. As the quartet played on, Miss Marple watched the suspects, knowing that the next move would bring the truth into sharper focus. Chapter 11. The Confession. The drawing-room at Willow Hall, still aglow with the soft light of the chandelier, hummed with a tense undercurrent as the string quartet played a subdued melody. The staged commotion of the dropped tray had settled, but the air remained charged, the guests' murmurs laced with unease. Miss Jane Marple sat in her corner near the French doors, her knitting needles idle in her lap, her eyes sharp as they followed Thomas Reed's return from the pantry. The young waiter, pale and trembling, stood near Sir Henry Clithering, who held the jeweller's loupe in his hand, its small gleaming lens a silent accusation. The trap Miss Marple had suggested had stirred the waters, and now, she sensed, the truth was rising to the surface. Sir Henry, his years at Scotland Yard lending him an air of quiet authority, gestured for Thomas to follow him to the library, away from the prying eyes of the guests. Miss Marple rose, her shawl draped over her arm, and joined them, her presence unassuming but deliberate. Lady Beatrice, Clara Wentworth, and Gideon Vale remained in the drawing-room, their faces a study in varying degrees of composure. Beatrice's laced with concern, Clara's with a brittle smile, Vale's with a calculated stillness. Miss Marple noted their reactions, knowing that the real drama was about to unfold in the library's oak-panelled confines. Inside, the fire had dwindled to embers, casting a faint glow over the room. Sir Henry stood by the desk, the loupe placed before him like evidence in a courtroom. Thomas, seated in a leather chair, seemed to shrink into himself, his hands clasped tightly, his eyes fixed on the floor. Miss Marple settled into her usual armchair, her expression mild, but her mind alert, ready to catch the nuances of what was to come. "Thomas," Sir Henry began, his voice firm but not unkind, "this loupe is a jeweller's tool, not something a waiter would carry. You said you were holding it for someone. Who and why?" He leaned forward, his gaze steady, the weight of his experience bearing down on the young man. Thomas's lips trembled, and for a moment he seemed unable to speak. Then, in a rush, the words spilled out, his voice cracking with desperation. "I took it, sir. I took the earring. I didn't mean no harm, I swear. But I was in trouble. Bad trouble." He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "Mr. Carver, the lender in the village, he's been after me for months. I owe him more than I can pay, and he said he'd have me thrown out, ruin my family. I saw Lady Beatrice's earring, and I thought, just one, it'd be enough to clear my debt." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, her knitting untouched as she listened. Thomas's confession was raw, almost too raw, and she sensed the weight of truth in it, but not the whole truth. In St. Mary Mead, she had once heard a similar confession from a boy who'd stolen a watch, only to learn he'd been coerced by an older accomplice. She watched Thomas closely, noting the way his hands shook, the way his eyes avoided the loupe. "Tell us how you did it, Thomas," she said gently, her voice cutting through his panic like a soft breeze. "Every detail, please." Thomas swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was during the waltz, miss. Lady Beatrice was dancing, and I was near her with my tray. I'd seen her pause by the terrace earlier, and I thought if I could get close, I could slip the earring off. The clasp wasn't hard. I'd seen Mr. Vale show it to her once, how it worked. I brushed past her in the crowd, twisted the clasp, and took it. It was quick, no one noticed. He paused, his breath ragged. I didn't keep it on me. I went out to the terrace when no one was looking and hid it in a vase, one of those big stone ones by the steps. I was going to get it later, when things quieted down. Sir Henry's brow furrowed, and he exchanged a glance with Miss Marple. A vase on the terrace, he said. We searched there this morning and found nothing but dirt. Thomas's eyes widened, his panic flaring anew. It was there, sir, I swear. I put it in the urn, wrapped in a bit of cloth from my pocket. I didn't take it nowhere else. His voice rose, and he looked from Sir Henry to Miss Marple, as if pleading for belief. Miss Marple's mind raced, her thoughts returning to the terrace, the scuff marks, the black thread, the crested button. Thomas's story fit the clues, but the absence of the earring in the urn suggested another hand at work. Had someone seen him hide it and taken it? Or was Thomas lying, covering for another? The loop, she noted, was a curious detail. And this loop, Thomas, she said, her tone still gentle, where did you get it? You said you were holding it for someone. Thomas's face crumpled, and he hesitated, his eyes darting to the doctor. I took it from Mr. Vale's bag, miss, he admitted, his voice barely audible. He left it in the cloakroom earlier, and I thought I'd need it to check the earring to be sure it was real. I was going to give it back, I swear. Sir Henry's eyes narrowed, and he picked up the loop, turning it over in his hand. You stole from Vale as well. This puts you in deeper, lad. He paused, his voice softening. If you're telling the truth, we'll find the earring in that vase. If not, you'd best come clean now. Thomas shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. I'm telling the truth, sir. I hid it in the vase. I didn't take it nowhere else. Someone must have got to it before me. His voice broke, and he buried his face in his hands again, his sobs muffled but genuine. Miss Marple leaned back, her mind sifting through the confession. Thomas's story was plausible. His debt to Carver, his desperation, his opportunity during the waltz. The black thread matched his uniform, and the scuff marks on the balustrade could be his, from a hurried escape to the terrace. But the loop tied him to Vale, and the missing earring suggested a complication, perhaps an accomplice, or a second thief. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead case, where a stolen locket was recovered because the thief's partner had betrayed him, taking the prize for himself. Henry, she said quietly, we must check the vase again, immediately. If Thomas is telling the truth, the earring may still be there, overlooked in our earlier search. Sir Henry nodded, his expression grim. Agreed. I'll send Perkins to the terrace now. He turned to Thomas, his voice firm. You'll stay here, under watch, until we confirm your story. He signalled to a footman outside the library door, who stepped in to keep an eye on the trembling waiter. Miss Marple accompanied Sir Henry to the terrace, where Perkins was already examining the stone urn at the corner of the steps. The urn, half hidden by ivy, was large enough to conceal a small object, its interior dark with soil and leaves. Perkins reached in, his gloved hands sifting carefully, and after a moment he pulled out a small bundle of cloth, the black, like Thomas's uniform, and tied with a knot. Sir Henry took it, his fingers steady as he unwrapped it. There, nestled in the fabric, was the diamond earring. its teardrop shape catching the fading light, undamaged and unmistakable. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly, though her expression remained serene. "Well done, Henry," she said softly. "Thomas was telling the truth, at least about the hiding place, but the loop, that's a puzzle. Why take it from Vale, unless he was working with him or being used by him?" Sir Henry pocketed the earring, his mind racing. "Vale's involved, I'd bet on it. The loop ties them together, and Vale's past makes him a likely candidate for fencing the duel. But Thomas's confession seems genuine. He's not clever enough to lie this well." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts turning to the drawing-room, where Vale, Clara, and Beatrice waited. "Thomas is guilty, Henry, but he may not be alone. The loop suggests Vale's hand, or at least his tools, in this affair. And Clara's pearl bead, Beatrice's crested button, they're still unanswered questions. In St. Mary Mead, a stolen brooch led to 2 culprits, one who took it and one who sold it. We may have a similar pair here." Sir Henry's eyes gleamed with determination. "We'll confront Vale next, and see how he explains the loop. For now, the earring's back, and Thomas is in custody. You've done it again, Jane." Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Not quite, Henry. The earring is found, but the full story is not yet told. Let's return to the drawing-room and see how our suspects react." As they turned back to the house, the terrace silent behind them, Miss Marple felt the threads of the mystery tightening, the truth now within reach, waiting to be unravelled. Chapter 12. Reflections by the Fire. The drawing-room at Willow Hall, once a stage for glittering revelry, now held a sombre air as the evening deepened. The chandelier's light cast soft shadows across the gathered guests who sat in uneasy silence, their earlier whispers of speculation hushed by the weight of resolution. The diamond earring, recovered from the stone urn on the terrace, lay on a velvet cushion in Sir Henry Clithering's hand, its teardrop shape catching the firelight like a captured star. Lady Beatrice Ashford, seated near the fireplace, clutched her restored heirloom, her face a mixture of relief and lingering indignation. The string quartet had been dismissed, and the room felt smaller, as if the walls themselves were closing in on the truth now laid bare. Miss Jane Marple, in her familiar corner by the French doors, sat with her knitting folded neatly in her lap, her lace shawl draped over her shoulders. Her eyes, bright and bird-like, moved from face to face. Lady Beatrice, her composure restored but her glances still sharp. Clara Wentworth, her burgundy gown a stark contrast to her pale, tight-lipped expression. Gideon Vale, standing by the sideboard with a forced calm, his gloved hands clasped tightly. And Thomas Reed, now absent, confined to a servant's room under the watchful eye of a footman. The confession had unravelled the mystery, but Miss Marple knew that the threads of motive and opportunity were not fully woven together. Sir Henry, standing before the fireplace, addressed the small group of suspects and key guests who had remained. "The earring has been recovered," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of his Scotland Yard days. "Young Thomas Reed has confessed to taking it during the waltz, hiding it in the urn on the terrace to retrieve later. His motive was debt, a desperate attempt to appease a ruthless lender. The jeweller's loop found in his possession, taken from Mr. Vale's bag, confirms his intent to verify the gem's value." He held up the earring, its sparkle a silent testament to the truth. "Lady Beatrice, your heirloom is safe, and the culprit is in custody." Lady Beatrice rose, her sapphire gown rustling, and took the earring with trembling fingers. "Thank you, Henry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And you, Miss Marple, for your keen insight. To have this returned, it means more than I can say. Those earrings are my family's legacy, a link to our past." She fastened the earring in her ear, reuniting it with its twin, and the room seemed to exhale, the tension easing but not dissolving entirely. Clara Wentworth, seated near the grand piano, offered a tight smile. "A fortunate resolution," she said, her tone clipped, "though one wonders how a mere waiter could be so bold." Her fingers brushed the pearl-trimmed shawl draped over her shoulders, and Miss Marple noted the gesture, recalling the pearl bead found near the French doors, a clue that had not yet found its place in the puzzle. Gideon Vale, his expression carefully neutral, inclined his head. "Indeed, a relief," he said, his voice smooth but strained. "I'm glad my loop proved useful, even if in the hands of a thief. I trust it will be returned." His eyes flicked to Sir Henry, who nodded curtly, the loop still in his possession. Miss Marple's lips twitched faintly, her mind lingering on Vale's words. The loop, she thought, was a curious detail. Stolen by Thomas, yes, but its presence raised questions about Vale's role. Had he been entirely unaware, or was there a deeper connection? In St. Mary Mead, she had once unravelled a theft where a shopkeeper's assistant took the blame, only for the mastermind to be the shopkeeper himself, orchestrating the crime from the shadows. She watched Vale's gloved hands, still and deliberate, and wondered if they hid more than nerves. Sir Henry turned to Miss Marple, his expression one of admiration. "Jane, your idea to stage the gathering tonight was the key. That distraction with the tray flushed Thomas out, just as you predicted. You see what others miss." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her tone remained modest. "It's only a matter of watching people, Henry," she said softly. "They tell you everything if you know how to listen. Young Thomas was desperate, and desperation makes one careless. The terrace, the urn, the loop, they all pointed to him, but it was his own fear that betrayed him." She paused, her gaze drifting to the French doors, where the terrace lay silent in the moonlight. "Yet I wonder if we've seen the whole picture. The pearl bead, the crested button, they suggest other hands at work, or at least other eyes watching." Sir Henry's brow furrowed. "You think there's more to it?" Thomas's confession seemed solid, and the earring was exactly where it is certain, he said. "Solid, yes," Miss Marple replied, her voice thoughtful. "But confessions, like clues, can be incomplete. Thomas took the earring, I've no doubt, but the loop ties him to Mr. Vale, and the bead points to Mrs. Wentworth's shawl. The button, with its hawk crest, could belong to Lady Beatrice's cloak or another's. In St. Mary Mead, a stolen bracelet was recovered, but the real culprit was not the boy who confessed, but his employer, who had goaded him into it. We must be sure Thomas acted alone." Sir Henry nodded, his mind turning over her words. "I'll question Vale about the loop again," he said, "and I'll have the button checked against Beatrice's cloak and the guest's outerwear. If there's an accomplice, we'll find them." He glanced at the suspects, who were now dispersing, their relief tempered by lingering suspicion. "For now, though, the case is closed, thanks to you, Jane." Lady Beatrice approached, her earrings gleaming as she clasped Miss Marple's hand. "I cannot thank you enough," she said, her voice warm but tinged with something Miss Marple could not quite place. "Relief, yes, but also a flicker of wariness. You've saved my family's honour, And my peace of mind?" Miss Marple smiled, her expression gentle, but her eyes searching. "I'm glad to have helped, Beatrice," she said, "but do take care of those earrings. They're more trouble than they're worth sometimes." She noted Beatrice's quick glance at Clara Wentworth, who was now leaving the room, her shawl trailing behind her. As the guests began to depart, their murmurs fading into the night, Sir Henry joined Miss Marple by the fire, which had been stoked anew. "You're not entirely satisfied, are you, Jane?" he said, his voice low, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Miss Marple's needles resumed their quiet rhythm, her gaze fixed on the flames. "The earring is back, Henry, and that's a victory. But people are like tapestries, complex, layered, with threads that run deeper than we see. Thomas's debt drove him to steal, but I wonder if someone else saw his desperation and used it. The loop, the bead, the button, they're loose ends, and I don't like loose ends." She paused, her lips pursing slightly. In St. Mary Mead, a stolen teapot led to a web of deceit, because the thief's sister had whispered the idea in his ear. We may yet find such a whisperer here. Sir Henry chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You'll never rest, will you, Jane? Always chasing the next thread." "Not chasing, Henry," she replied, her eyes twinkling. "Just listening. The truth always speaks if you're patient." She gathered her knitting, rising to return to her room, her mind already turning to the next mystery that might cross her path. As the fire crackled and the room emptied, Miss Marple felt the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle solved, but with the lingering sense that Willow Hall's shadows held secrets yet to be uncovered.